G'day Bomber fans, we'll cancel September holidays, the Bombers are going to win the flag, we dismantled the Dogs in definitely not a meaningless practice match, the Baby Bombers get the job done by 3 goals. There's lots to discuss today, so much so that I've split this up into a couple of videos. So here you're going to hear broad thoughts about the match as a whole, the team-wide things, not individual players, but on Monday I'm going to release a little player-by-player analysis or recap, going in depth into each player and how they performed, where they did. Remember guys, this is just a practice match. Yes, we won, and yes, we looked fun, and we were generally pretty good as a team, but this time last year, North Melbourne battered up Collingwood, and look what happened to the Roos last season. So these games really don't mean as much as you may think they do. Keep that in mind if you're thinking of raising expectations for the year for the Bombers. But yeah, let's get into the practice review. All right, well, the first term, so before the game started, there was a downfall. It was raining cats and dogs, but it did clear for us a bit early. So if you were tuning in late, you may have seen sunny conditions, but the ball was obviously still very slippery, and it was really windy to the Dogs side of kicking, and that may have made what looks like good conditions on TV a lot worse. So both teams were a tad rusty and poor with foot skills at times. The Dogs won the quarter pretty comfortably, and they looked the much better of the two teams. It was back and forth a bit early. We had a few chances. Draper kicked a brilliant goal, showing he's a genuine threat up forward, but the Dogs just looked the more efficient of the teams. I thought they opened us up a bit on transition a few times, especially early. They did it once or twice, which had me worried a bit, and it's definitely something we need to look at going forward, even if it only happened a few times, because that has hurt us for years now, teams exiting D50 easily. And when the ball was up forward, I thought they just looked the more likely to be in goal scoring positions. Sam Darcy was a real threat. He took 3 marks inside 50, I think, and he kicked 1 goal too, but he should have had 3, and the Dogs should have had more than they did. Not focusing on the scoreboard or anything, because it doesn't really matter, but you almost want those goals to go through against us, so it tells us where we're at defensively, because that scoreboard did flatter us a bit in the first. I just thought the Dogs were the much better of the two teams early, especially in the second half of that first quarter. They really locked the ball in their forward 50 and gathered repeat entries and made it really hard for us to exit. There was a clear differential with their forward pressure and our forward pressure to start, something that was fixed eventually, don't worry, but it's still something to note. Now, I thought there were times where our defensive structure looked a little bit weak as well. Obviously, it helps the Dogs that Mackay and Ridley weren't there, but as good as Reid and Hayes looked in contest at times, I thought the work they did leading to that stage before their opponent went for the lead, it just needed to be a little bit better, clean that up a bit, because Sam Darcy in particular, as I said, he had too many opportunities to get his hands out to the ball in front of his opponent. At one stage, he was up on Jackson Pryor in a marking contest, and that wasn't really long after a centre bounce, so that really shouldn't have happened. But yeah, it was just a team's, brushing off the cobwebs. There was nothing too fancy. The weather was obviously not great early. It was a pretty lively first for the Bulldogs. We were still getting the feel of things a bit. The second term, the rain started to come back down. It was really horrible there for a bit. I was worried we were going to have a proper wet weather game of footy, which just wouldn't have suited any team this early into the year. You really don't want games to be proper scraps like that when players are coming back from injury and whatnot leading into a season. But to be fair, the weather did get us back on track. We started really imposing ourselves around the contest more. It suited the likes of Hobbs and Caldwell and Sartas. They were winning the midfield battle, and yes, it helped that Bontempelli and Liberatore and players like that weren't there, but it's still good for them to get this little confidence booster. The wind was going our way, which made it really hard for the Dogs to move the footy. Tough conditions for them. We played territory game really well and just locked the ball in our forward half, and our forward pressure was really quite excellent after it being a tad down early. Kako, Menzie, even guys like Perkins and taller players like Langford, Jones and Caddy, they were all putting in the work to create unrest in the Dogs' defensive 50. I thought our pressure was excellent. It allowed us to create repeat entries and give us more chances inside 50. But Archie Perkins, he in particular really flicked the switch for us. I thought he had a quiet first quarter, but really changed the tone in the second, which was great to see. He's playing that stringer role as that power forward, and he did so much. He was a marking target. He took a great clunk as the ball was still water-soaked. He kicked the goal too after his teammates were wayward, so that was good. And his second goal was very Stringer-esque as well. It was a soccer from about 35 metres out, goal out of nothing. So that's a little look at what his role will look like if he's playing at his best, but also his forward pressure is something that we didn't really see with Stringer too much last year. So obviously he's not at the level of Stringer, but there's glimpses as to how he can become a better player, a more complete player for our system. He was really dangerous. He played really well that quarter. As the ground dried up, you saw our young players really get involved too. Isaac Kako, the wet weather suited him early to get around the ball a bit, but he also kicked his first goal for the club. Lovely snap from about 35 metres out. And then on the siren, Nate Caddy drilled one home from 55. It was the most eye-catching moment of the quarter, I'd say, but I think leading up to that moment was what made it so special. The kick was great from 55, but the fact that he took that mark out of position, that's just so... I guess that's what you have to come to expect with Nate Caddy, him just contesting everything, throwing his body at the ball. It makes him a really dangerous forward. He didn't have a crazy great game, only the one goal, but I thought his attack on the ball was really good throughout, and he was just a dangerous forward because of that. For the term we kicked goals, the Dogs didn't. Our young players looked fantastic. There were real highlights too. It was a really pleasing term in quite shocking conditions. Now the third was always going to be a really intriguing one for me because we've obviously seen the first and the second, seen how both teams combat the wind and are going against them, and also how they benefit with the wind going their way. Both teams won the quarter with the wind. You saw the way the breeze played around with both teams. So seeing how we combated it after a pretty average first term with some holes in defence, that was going to be the test, especially because we had some important players rested. Merritt had the jacket on, Redmond was done for the day, he had a bit of a knock, Langford too, so we were a really, really young team in that second half. Guys like Clark, Unwin, the SSP duo, they all joined the field, but I really liked the way we held up against the wind in the third quarter. The ball was in our half a lot for the quarter, but we looked really solid in defending that footy. I thought Reid was positioning himself a lot better. Pryor was taking clunks in D50. Role players like Jones and Dersma and even Perkins were lending a hand back there too. You could tell we had a big chat to our defence and just the team as a whole, and really worked on improving our structure for the quarter. Obviously, it's not important to get the win and limit the scoring, but for the regular season, it's pleasing to see that this is getting drilled in. It was a pretty boring term overall compared to the others, just the 2 goals from both teams, but I liked that. I like that we broke even in conditions that suited our opponents. From a defensive viewpoint, that was the best quarter, even though we had others that scored less. So good quarter from a team-wide defensive view. Now the other thing to note was obviously Tom Edwards. Both he and Baldwin joined the game at the same stage, both battling out for that last spot on the list, but I think we might know who might be getting it. Edwards came on and just looked at home immediately. He kicked 2 really nice goals. He was positioning himself in the forward half so well. And on the flip side, Baldwin had a couple of turnovers, one of which resulted in a goal back the other way. He did take a brilliant mark to start his term. Awesome intercept pack mark, but he had to watch as his rival absolutely tore it up down the other end of the field. Unfortunately for Baldwin, he might be seeing his new Essendon teammate, Edwards, become the Essendon teammate to the others, but yeah, incredible for Edwards. He really just does look like he should be playing AFL footy already. And the fourth, you just had some tired legs out there. It was a much messier term. It was evident with the ruck battle, Draper was just a lot more primed than his opponent Crossley, who's battling for an SSP spot at the Dogs. Draper was absolutely running him ragged. He almost kicked an 80-metre bomb from the first centre bounce, and then a few minutes later had a set shot and got the goal. We won the game, but the fourth ultimately wasn't that pleasing a term. There were some lapses in the defensive half, which resulted in goals or shots against, and that's never ideal. But also, I'm probably just nitpicking a bit. Up our way, Tom Edwards was just obscene again. His third goal was good, but his third quarter was good, but his fourth was just unreal. He took a great mark off a Draper floater and then kicked a lovely snap not long after. His fourth goal for the game, leading everyone on the field, only playing a half of footy, all while wearing Ridley's number 14. He kicked Ridley's career goal tally in 2 consecutive quarters. I'm going to talk about him more in the video tomorrow in the play-by-play recap, but I just thought we saw out the game again and really just gave our defenders some help with our forward pressure again, but also our two-way running. Guys like Dersma, Roberts, he really lifted, Perkins again, Menzies, Kako, these guys worked really hard to lend a hand back the other way of the field, and that's the most pleasing thing of the game. I'll talk about that a bit more. It's kind of like what you saw at Hawthorn with Dylan Moore a bit. If you can get your smaller mobile forwards working back the other way, it makes it really hard for the opposition to find space inside 50. I thought we did that really well, and it's a big reason why we saw out the win with little to no discomfort. But yeah, got the win. Not that it really matters. Now let's go on to what we liked and disliked about the game. So what did we like? As I spoke about pressure, that pressure around the ball and that pressure even just getting bodies back into the defensive half. Not always being involved in defending, but just being a presence back there, that just helps. So seeing the players buy into that was good. I will say the conditions definitely help with that. I'd love to see how it goes against Geelong next week in the dry, because the ball just does move slower in the wet. It gives teams more time to set up, and kicks are never as dangerous. So we defended the ground well for the most part. The first was obviously a tad iffy, but after that we were solid. Again though, weather helped. I liked the midfield mix. I thought those players in and under made a huge difference. Hobbs was genuinely pretty good, which was needed. He's back against the wall a bit and trying to find his way into the team. Sartas was really lively. He would have been one of our biggest ball winners. Such clean hands in the wet too. I thought he was great. Caldwell too. And a lot of what was these guys doing well was due to Brian and Draper winning the ruck battle. They gave our mids a good go in there, so well done to those two. I thought we did really well to manage a decent forward line. The Dogs are obviously missing some elite players, but guys like Norton and Waitman really didn't have that much of an impact. It was shaky early into the game with Darcy, but Reed and Hayes found their feet and made it through for the rest of the game, and also just made it tough for the tools that they were playing on. McGrath and Pryor were really solid on ground level, Shield too. Plenty to say about these guys, and the main thing, from the looks of things, we got through the game unscathed. I think that's the most important thing. I don't think there were any injury concerns. Redmond suffered a proper knock and didn't play out the game after half-time, but I think that was just precautionary. I think he was probably going to get rested anyway. Baldwin was limping after a contest at one stage, but played the VFL match after. Overall, it was a pretty pleasing performance with no injuries. A few cons, obviously, which I'll talk about now. Okay, what didn't we like? The Dogs were a pretty weak side. Bontempelli and Libba didn't play despite being listed. That made it pretty easy for our midfield. I would have loved to see Sartas and Hobbs get a go against those guys. Sartas in particular, I really wanted that proper exposure against Bontempelli, but unfortunately we didn't see it, so that's the annoying one for me. The fact the Dogs weren't full strength was obviously not great, but then again, neither were we. We were missing some of our best players. It goes both ways. And now also, despite us, for the most part, defending the ground reasonably well, there were glimpses as to how easy it can be to score against us with some good ball movement. I reckon Bailey Dale playing would have made it a lot harder for us to defend, but yeah, there were a few times, especially early, where we were opened up on the counter, and the weather definitely slowed that down to help us, so I'm going to wait until dry footy to see what our defensive structure actually looks like. This new system based around forward pressure is great, but we haven't had a proper glimpse at it yet. What else didn't I like? We took Langford off late to see what life looks like with Peter Wright in the forward line, and again, the weather doesn't help, but that just didn't work as well as it did with others up forward. Draper up forward was really dangerous, but I thought he created clutter. I hate to bag on Wright, but it is just a big shift having him playing compared to a 2-ruck setup. There were obviously quite a few errors with ball in hand, but I won't say that's a con or negative because that will happen to every team this early, especially in the wet. But there were times where we turned the ball over after a mark around the ground, unforced errors that should just never happen with short passing, and some missed handballs. Also, a couple of stoppages where the Dogs won it out the back a tad easier than I would have liked, but again, we're nitpicking. For the most part, that was just a decent performance. Again, though, we cannot read too much into this. This is a practice match, teams trying new things, players playing that aren't necessarily ready for the AFL. Yes, we won, we played better than Dogs, we played well, but it doesn't mean we're going to be a good team in 2025. Just be happy with the performance, but don't see it as a sign that we're destined for finals or anything. Still a lot we need to fix up. Let's get on to the votes for the first time this year. Alright, now I know you'll want to hear about players a bit more, obviously, so stay tuned tomorrow for the video there. There's going to be a proper dive into each player. I'll talk about everyone in detail, but I thought I'd just give you some votes anyway. These aren't going to count towards the vote tally for the home and away season, the award. This is just a little indicator for you to see who I thought was best on ground. So, one vote to Sam Draper, who was really influential, especially late in the game. He dominated the ruck late and was just a threat up forward. I will say though, positionally, we're yapping again, but I thought that Draper did create some clutter every now and then. Although Wright had a worse game, a significantly worse game, I thought his positioning was much better for the forwards around him, whereas Draper probably drew a bit of a crowd when he was in the forward line and just with his positioning, but I still think he played really well. 2 votes to Dylan Shield, who was excellent off halfback, not just with the ball in hand, but defensively he was really sound. That was what surprised me the most with his game, the fact that he was actually a reasonable defender. I didn't expect that to be the case. And Elijah Sartas, 3 votes. He was a bull inside the contest. The conditions obviously suited him perfectly, but he was great in and under. His ball use wasn't obviously great in the weather, and I think there were a few times where we saw some unforced errors, but I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt because he played so well. My role player is Xavier Dersma, who was absolutely everywhere. He was crucial in stemming their attacks. He was lending a hand down back, getting a bit of the ball his own. Some other players that I really liked were Jai Caldwell. Tom Edwards was great, but only played a half. Perkins was really impactful. But yeah, if you want to hear more about players, watch tomorrow's video. That is all for now, though. Cheers for watching this review or recap. Stay tuned for more videos like this. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and go Bombers.